at the end of the day, we filed a protest. It took us about a year and a half to get about 2 years of protests resolved. And we took that assessment down from $25 million to $9 million.
Wow.
And it ended up saving the company over the years that we appealed 7 digits.
If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Earmark. I'm Blake Oliver, and today we're talking about property taxes, how to minimize them, whether for your own firm or for your clients. We're going to discuss mistakes to avoid and what it takes to build a winning appeal case. If you or your clients own commercial property, this is an episode you won't want to miss. And joining me to talk about all of this is Josh Malancuk. Josh is the president and founder of JM Tax Advocates, a firm that specializes in helping businesses minimize their property tax liabilities. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Blake. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you and to your membership.
So you're the first CPA that I've met who specializes in property taxes. Interesting niche, interesting specialty there. Why do you specialize in property taxes?
Well, so anyone that says that, hey, I went to college to become a property tax expert is probably lying, because we all have our own, unique roads falling into this unique niche, right? And so there's no colleges that teach property tax in school, and so it's not, part of the accounting curriculum, and yet, it's an area that is tremendously important to any property owner or business owner. Because it's likely their number one or number two tax burden type. And so what you have is this huge defined need, all of these property owners that need help or unlikely they don't know they need help, but they do. And yet there are so few specialists who can actually move the needle south with the property tax bills. And so the reason I like this area is because there's never a dull moment. Any given day looks completely different from the next in that I may be involved with my team to help manage compliance functions related to property tax, or keeping the government accountable through a protest process. Maybe I'm out wandering and doing a survey to discover items with the property that may be wrong with the assessment record. And so, we're just constantly doing and seeing things, and, had a lot of experience with some of the largest property tax owners in the United States in serving their best interests in this area. So it's very much value driven. Most of the time, we're able to achieve significant savings. And so it's very much value added and savings cost driven to help keep the profit and loss statement on the right side of profitability.
So you came out of the big firms. You were at Crow, you were at PwC and Deloitte. Were you doing property tax there?
So actually I was. And when I first started out of school, I worked with another regional firm that you didn't name in the audit function. And so after about 2 years, was kind of one of those board staff auditors that just needed something else to do other than audit financial statements from year to year. And so at the time, the firm that I worked for had just acquired a boutique consulting firm that dealt with state taxes. They had a property tax group and needed some resources. And so, meanwhile, I had built some experience with preparing personal property tax returns. And so I knew what property tax was. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'm probably going to be looking for a different job within a matter of months if I don't try something new. And just kind of fell into the area, really enjoyed it. Had a lot of responsibility early on with the team that I was working with, and just really grabbed a hold of it. And 28 years later, I now own my own firm, and have been really involved with some pretty amazing clients, and have built significant credentials over that 28-year period to best serve our clients during these types of consulting engagements.
So clients are overpaying on their property taxes. That's that's the problem that we're solving here. They are assessed a value. Property tax is calculated based on that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like everything that you do boils down to fighting that assessment, right? Getting the valuation changed on that property so that it reduces the property tax. When we're talking about specifically property tax, is that right? Do I have like the essence of it?
Well, it's more, it is that, but it's more along the lines of adding transparency to an often misunderstood area. And so most controllers or business owners don't have the expertise or wherewithal to best evaluate their property tax assessments to determine whether they should appeal the assessment, whether the assessment is fair, or whether they're undervalued, which can happen, right? And so you don't want to just go into a situation where you're appealing or amending your value blindly, because it can get you into trouble. Because sometimes we do find that the property tax assessment is undervalued, and you don't want to kick the bear inadvertently and increase your taxes without having a seasoned navigator, working with you. So there's just a very different process that we follow by leveraging in appraisal tools that will help us kind of offer our best practice knowledge with their property type in any geographic area in the country that they have an operation, and bring a credible market analysis approach to properly evaluating their assessments. You see, a lot of what we do, Blake, involves almost like a mini appraisal of the business assets. And most CPAs that I know are not appraisers. That is part of my background. Besides being a CPA, I'm a certified general real estate appraiser. So somewhere along the way, I built the 3,000 hours of experience required, and created actually full-blown narrative appraisal reports while working under a seasoned MAI appraiser to get my license to be able to practice with real estate appraisal. And that's a very different credentialing and education path than most accountants have as part of going to school for their accounting degree, or gaining experience with public accounting, or maybe in private with a company.
So when I get that assessment notice in the mail, and I'm just thinking, personally, my own house, right? I get that annual notice. Here's your assessed value, and now here's your property tax calculated based on that. Or maybe they send two different ones. Is it essentially the same for commercial properties, where some government official assesses the value and increases that or not every year? And like, I guess my other follow-up question is, if that's the process, how do they do it?
Well, so most people don't realize this, but you cannot appeal the property tax itself. Okay. The rate is what it is. The amount that you pay every year is what it is. The only thing that you can appeal is the assessed value. And so the only kind of basis for appealing that assessed value is if it's incorrect. In other words, is the assessment over what the market value would be for your property type? And,
Mm.
with certain property types, like a home, you're going to have lots and lots of sales, probably sales right across the street with the broker signs that were hanging up, 3 months ago. And so it's relatively easy in most cases to predict what your home value should be on a per bedroom basis or per square foot, depending on what the market is saying. But it's not so easy when you're talking about a large industrial property, like let's just say a 1 million square foot manufacturing property that's in a small town, where you're lucky to see sales of any sorts within a 3 year period of time. And so, what's important there is being able to kind of expand your scope and replicate what a typical market participant would look like, the same way that a home buyer would be for a neighborhood. You'd be looking for a market participant, and what their predictive behavior would be with a property that's a certain size and type. And it may be where you have to expand your search for transactions into a regional approach or possibly national approach in the case of a 1 million square foot facility, because you'd be having a national buyer potentially evaluating alternative sites and looking at market pricing comparators between those sites. And so we have the ability to kind of replicate that behavior through our comprehensive subscriptions and databases on a national basis. And most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, your county and your state assessors do not have that same capability. And so they're kind of flying blind with their assessments, which is why with the property types that we deal with, namely the industrial, the senior care, the hotels, and large commercial properties, we see about 80% of the time those properties are overvalued by 20%. And so a very high propensity for appeals.
Ah,
If the mark is, it's usually hundreds of thousands of dollars to maybe millions of dollars at stake with the annual property tax bill, and so and a lot of complexity with doing a correct market analysis to determine whether the property is fairly valued or undervalued or overvalued.
got it. So, like with my house, there were 4 homes in my neighborhood that sold recently. So, those are easy comps for the assessor. They can look at my house, they can look at those 4 houses, compare the square footage, compute an assessed value for my home or
That's
what they think it should be. But you're talking about these big facilities, whether it's a hotel or a senior care facility or a manufacturing facility, where in a city, in a smaller city, well, even a big city, there might not be that many exchanging hands. So it's not like there is a
Yes.
market price for this sort of thing, and even if there is, maybe it's not directly comparable. So the assessor has a really hard job to figure out what the value is, and you're saying they don't have access to the same national data, the same ways of assessing these values. I'm going to guess they're going to err on the side of going high rather than going low, right? Because their job is to essentially bring in revenue for the local government. So, and you're saying it can be as much as 20% off.
Well, it's more like they go different. So what they're left with is what's called a mass appraisal model, and in many cases that's based upon reproduction cost new or construction cost trends in the area, with very little tools to properly apply depreciation to bring the cost down to a true market value. And so our tools allow us to really bridge that gap on the depreciation side through market analysis. And so that really helps us
So you
to
mean,
better predict that market value would be for that property type.
so you're saying, are you saying that they are looking at what it would cost to like build a new facility? So they're not taking
Yeah,
into account,
exactly.
like you said, the
Yeah,
depreciation, right? The wear and
that's
tear.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of looks a lot like insurable value with not a whole lot of translation to depreciated cost new to get to market value, right? So they start different. It could be high or it could be low, but it's different. And it's an easy modeling approach based upon square footage of construction cost trends. But then the depreciation side is where the rail car goes off the tracks, right? And so our job is to essentially translate the assessor's mass appraisal conclusion with true market data sources to better predict what that market participant, willing buyer, willing seller would pay for that property as of the assessment date for each of the years that we're evaluating for the assessment notice.
So you're coming up with a more accurate market value for these properties that is different than the assessed value. So to get that total tax bill down, now um, you've got to appeal. So what is that process like, appealing an assessed value?
Well, so whenever we get hired by a client, the first question that we want to answer as part of serving their interests is, when do I need to file a protest to preserve my appeal rights, to open the assessment for review, to provide market evidence, and potentially change the value down to reality, right? And the notice period looks very different depending on the state that you're dealing with, heck, even within the counties within a state. And so mapping that out is step one as part of an evaluation strategy and process for a property tax review. Very similar process for reviewing business personal property taxes, which is basically the tax that businesses pay in most states on their equipment and possibly on their inventory amounts that are reported each year. And that usually starts off with a rendition or a return, so a self-assessment of their equipment. And then after that, the assessor will come up with their value based upon the cost amounts that are reported by in service year. And so if that is incorrect, then they're guaranteed to overpay, their property taxes for that year. And so, that kind of becomes our job to evaluate whether the return reporting is correct or not, to possibly file amendments, or if the assessor does not apply a correct depreciation multiplier to the cost new, then we'll appeal that as well. And so we're just lending that accountability and scrutiny to make sure that our client is not left overpaying at the end of the day with their business property taxes. And on the real estate, very similar. We map out the appeal deadline. We figure out when that is. We get a power of attorney that allows us to file a protest on our client's behalf. And then we meet the protest deadline, provide support, possibly go to a county and or state level hearing, to present our case as to why the original assessment was incorrect. And then at the end of the day, we typically are able to achieve significant savings that corrects the assessment and leaves our client in a position that was much better than they were at to begin with, as part of leveraging an experienced navigator to bring transparency to this often misunderstood area.
And how long do you have after you get that notice in general to make this appeal? I assume it. I mean, I imagine it's different everywhere, but is there like a rule of thumb?
So each jurisdiction is going to have its own period to appeal the property assessment. So once you get the notice, the appeal deadline can literally be as short as 10 days or as long, typically a 30-day process, or there may be no notice at all, and there's just a set period every year that you have to appeal. And so, it's important to know the state, it's important to know the county within the state, and to kind of map that into your process so that you are properly managing the property tax assessments to evaluate and exact relief on a year by year basis. But most of the deadline periods, Blake, in case you're wondering, fall right around the second quarter of the year. So right now we're kind of in the thick of things with most of the protest deadlines falling this month and next, for about, I would say, 75% of the jurisdictions. Some are earlier than this month. So anyone that missed the deadline last month, well, they're going to overpay for a year, unfortunately. but they can still get ahead of next year. But in some cases, the protest window falls kind of more in the fall time period. So again, that's why it's so important to answer that question up front.
Mm.
When do I need to appeal? And to make sure you're
Yeah.
calendaring your deadlines appropriately.
And it sounds like it's mostly a go forward kind of change. In general, I'm not going to get refunds for property tax I overpaid in the past, or can you go back and get some money back?
Yes, so like it really depends. So with the personal property, in some cases, there's a statute of limitations that allow you to provide amended return support for prior year relief and then going forward. In other jurisdictions, it's a notice process where if you miss the deadline, then you're overpaying, and then you're a forward thinking, type approach. With the real estate, it's almost always a current year. You either meet that appeal period, or you're going forward into the following year to exact relief. But in some cases, the jurisdictions are late in the game with sending their notices, and so you can still appeal last year's value. So that's why it's important to kind of
Mm.
map all of this out, to know the jurisdiction, to know the protest rules, and to know where the jurisdiction is at with their reassessment process, so that you can put the best strategy forward, for the company.
What's it like making one of these appeals? Is it like going to court?
Well, there's never a dull moment, and I would say there's really not a typical road, and so a lot of times these appeals end up getting filed, evidence is provided, and then there's some informal discussion and negotiation to resolve the appeal. And that's probably at least 60 to 70% of the time. You can informally resolve the appeal once you've properly built your support, right? And in the other cases, you're going to a county board level, and the county board is still kind of informal, and you can present your evidence. There's back and forth, and once that county board decides, you have the ability to appeal to the next level, which may be a state administrative board, or maybe you're litigating in district court. At that point, you need a lawyer to represent the company. And so usually the state level or subsequent level appeals look a lot more formal. There's discovery rules that are involved, and you have to really understand the administrative procedural rules to practice with that state body, so that you don't inadvertently stub your toe and then have your appeal disqualified. And so that is a very specific process. And as a company owner, if you're trying to take that on without that experience, you're likely going to disqualify the company for relief, just because you inadvertently didn't respond appropriately or fully as part of the procedural rule requirements for that state level appeal. So that one does kind of like practice law.
So let's assume we're going through this, right? So let's assume that we managed to stay out of court and we're doing this more informal process. And my question is, what does this case that you build look like? Is it a report you put together? Is it you have to go and provide testimony? How does it, like, what is the deliverable?
Well, so it's going to depend on the property type that we're reviewing, right? Because in some cases we're solely focused on transactional information. So what were sale prices for this property type doing on a per foot basis, or maybe we're primarily focused on the income approach, where we're looking at market leases and market expenses and market cap rates to come up with a value. And so that analysis can look vastly different depending on whether we're looking at an industrial property, an income producing commercial property like an assisted living facility, or an apartment or a hotel that's for rent, right? or if we're looking at a large commercial property that would generally transact as an owner occupied property, such as a large office headquarters. And so, depending on what we're looking at, there may be a lot of reliance on one of the three approaches between cost, income, or the sales comparison approach. But so, long story short is once we figured out the best approach, we build our market data and kind of bring that into an organized message to the assessor to basically support our contention that the market value is different than their assessment.
And these reports that you're building, these, I think you said mini evaluations, are they created individually for each client, or do you have like a technology tool that helps you automate the generation of these different valuations, the different methods, that sort of thing?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm explaining it
yeah.
right, but I guess,
So
is it like you handcraft each one, or have you figured out how to automate this to some extent?
there's no automation at all. It's all customized on a property by property basis. And I think that's what gets the assessors into trouble with their valuation differences is they use kind of a one size fits all mass appraisal model that they roll out across maybe tens of
Hmm.
thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of parcels in their jurisdiction or more, and it's a one size fits all type model, and that's why there's so many errors. Whereas our approach, we look property by property. We look at the specific age, the size, the type of property, the use, the land size. We look at other similar properties in the area, and we pull in only data that correlates to comparable property, not just a generic trend of this value per foot across every age property type. Now we're looking at a specific age bracket, size bracket, use bracket, land size bracket. It's all very much individually customized, and that's so important. And that's where we find our mistakes, with the original assessment. Same is true on the personal property, And so what more often than not happens is the company controller or CFO or someone that has an accounting background, maybe even their CPA firm, will create a return. They'll assume everything is kind of a same as last year position with very little review process whatsoever, and then we'll find all kinds of mistakes. In certain areas like is the right category being applied? On the return, are there breaks that could be pursued? Are there exemptions that could be pursued? Are all the assets even there anymore? I mean, there's a lot that goes into our review that
Yep.
that just wouldn't go into a review process at all with the return. And so the important thing to realize in the business personal property and to a certain extent real estate is that if there's an error because of the requirement to report every single year, if you have business presence in a jurisdiction, if there's an error, it's going to perpetuate every year until you fix it, right?
Right.
And so that $50,000 mistake in one year, you might not feel it, but 10 years later, you've got $500,000 lost down the toilet because you haven't scrutinized the property tax bill to make sure you're not overpaying your bill. And so that's what's so powerful about reviewing the property tax is once we fix an issue, there's typically a gift that keeps giving with a long-term annuity that can really make a big difference to any company these days.
So make this real for me. Walk me through a case that you have built, and taken to appeal and gotten the property tax assessment down and saved a client a lot of money. What do you have a favorite story, case study?
So I'll just bring to light to the group a client that is a mega food processor, right? And the food processor was being assessed at around $25 million for the real estate assessment. And very little questioning was just pay the bill, no more questioning beyond that, right? And so the taxes from that $25 million assessment were around they were around $1 million a year, right?
Okay,
So
that's a lot.
what our team did is we dug into the assessment record, and keep in mind this was a property that literally dealt back to the early 1900s with construction, with many additions over time, right? So very large, over 1 million square feet, built, almost in caveman days. It was prehistoric old practically, and a lot of functional problems with the facility. What our review uncovered, because we went through every single building, we went through the construction history with blueprints. We toured the site. Heck, I spent about a month. I'm not kidding you. I spent a month hiking around this manufacturing plant, just discovering all of the nuances and all of the ages and the sizes and ceiling heights and the like. And so what we did is we built this survey that was far more accurate than the assessment record. And in fact, we found entire sections of buildings that had been demolished that were still being assessed. We found ages that were incorrect. We found functional problems with the facility. And so the depreciation amounts were grossly undervalued. And so at the end of the day, we filed a protest. It took us about a year and a half to get about 2 years of protests resolved. And we took that assessment down from 25 million to $9 million.
Wow.
And it ended up saving the company over the years that we appealed 7 digits. And that assessment has continued to perpetuate since that time. And so the true benefit from way back when I appealed it to now is probably close to 8 digits.
That's amazing. What a great. So you actually had to go on site for a whole month and walk around and you're looking at all these buildings, some that are more than 100 years old, and you actually found there were buildings that were on the property tax assessment that didn't even exist anymore.
That is correct, Blake.
Wow. So I imagine that the owners were pretty grateful to you after you accomplished this for them. I mean, because you're saving them. I mean, if it was $1 million on 25 million assessed, and you took it down to 9 million assessed, that's like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah, and so what they ended up doing is once we got done with the one site, they gave us a whole state, which probably added about 30 more sites to the fold. And so we were able to kind of rinse and repeat a few
Wow.
more times, because of the great job that my team did with this one site that we reviewed.
You said it was a food processor. Were you like walking around with the special garb you got to wear, like the clean, the hair net and all that?
Oh yeah, I had the construction hat on and the safety glasses and the brightly colored vest, so none of the forklifts ran me over. At least if they did, they knew who they were hitting, and just all kinds of garb.
Is that something you do regularly still, or was that like this one client was a special case?
It's very common in a manufacturing environment to have to wear what's called PPE gear for safety requirements.
Yeah.
And so, that is something that is somewhat unique when you're looking at that property type. Is you're wandering around a pretty dangerous environment, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you have to be aware of where you're at. You have to follow a tour guide. A lot of times you have to take safety training, before you even are able to qualify to hike around a facility like that. And so you just have to be careful. I mean, because you can get injured just like anyone else that works there on a regular basis. And so you just have to be mindful of where you're at and what you're doing and pay attention.
That brings to mind my own experience in public accounting. I was a manager at a big firm, and one of my favorite experiences was touring a client facility. They made latex mattresses, those foam mattresses, and they they would make them, and then they had this giant hydraulic press that would squeeze them down to like, less than a centimeter, and then they'd roll them up and put them in a box. And it was so fun after sitting at my desk, for months and months, getting out and finally meeting this client and getting to see how they actually made this product. I think that's one of the neat things about accounting that people don't think about, is that if you work with manufacturers or anything where stuff is made, if you're lucky, if you got the right role, you get to go on site and see it happen. And that's a lot of fun anyway.
But it is always great to learn about any particular industry, because first of all, it's part of your education. There's always something to learn about different business types, and at some point when you see enough of them, you start to see trends, and that helps you be more effective with the next one. And so over time you really become an industry expert of that property type, but also you become aware of industry trends, and it just helps you be more effective with building your case for your client. So I agree. It's probably one of the more fascinating parts of our jobs here at JM Tax is really getting familiar with our client and their business challenges, and really getting into the weeds of what's important to them, and what is happening from a trend perspective, so that we can bring that into our messaging to tell their case when we're arguing for property tax relief.
So, how do you get your clients? Do they find you directly? Do you do they are they referrals from other CPA firms? Like, how did you build your practice?
So most of our clients come to us through referrals. We kind of work on a relationship standpoint with other synergistic organizations that have clients that are in the industries that we want to work in. In other cases, we have strategic alliances with trade associations. Like we have several strategic relationships with manufacturing associations on a state by state basis. In other cases, there's MEPS organizations that partner with manufacturers. With senior care, we're part of some trade associations as well, and so that helps. But also getting out and talking with CPA societies on a state by state basis has been a great tool to grow our partnerships with CPA firms, because most of the time they don't have a property tax group in house, and if they hear of a client need, they're going to need to reach out to somebody that's a trusted partner, and so we like to position ourselves to work with CPA firms in that capacity.
So, I have a client that I think might be overpaying on their property tax. How do I work with you? Do you have a relationship? Do I make a referral of the client to you? Can I white label your services? How does it work?
Well, so we first of all, we don't white label. Our reputation in the marketplace as an advocate is as of JM Tax Advocates. So all of my state credentials are in my company's name, and so any letter of authorization would need to be under our clients under our name, right? But then secondly, as far as how we work, yes, it's on a referral basis, and so we work with and through that referral partner to communicate with the client. We like to have direct client contact, because that's absolutely essential with our discovery work. But we work through and with in partnership with referral partners, and kind of put our best foot forward by serving that client, and really help that referral partner look smart for bringing us in to begin with. And so that's just kind of how we work. But the other thing that's important to understand is, if someone is interested in having their client evaluated for property tax relief, our initial evaluation can be done without any dialogue with the company whatsoever. In other words, public records are easy to come by with property taxes. And so if someone says, hey, I've got a client, here's their address, here's what they do, we can take that information and pull their assessments and figure out how much they're paying in property taxes for business, personal, and real estate, when their appeal deadlines are coming up, whether they look to be overvalued, and what kind of potential savings might be had if they hire us as an experienced navigator to start a review process. And so, it's nice to be able to provide some value up front as part of an initial meeting, to kind of prompt moving forward together with a service opportunity.
If someone's listening and they have a referral for you, what's the best way for them to make that?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to reach out to me at jmtaxadvocates.com. Joshua at jmtaxadvocates.com is my email. Or you can just give me a call at 317-674-8390, and I'm at extension 100. Either one of those will get my attention. But if you forget my email, just go under our company website, www.jmtaxadvocates.com, under Contact Us, and you can reach out that way, and it'll make it back into my email inbox.
All right, Josh, one more question for you. We have a number of young accountants in their first few years in public accounting that listen to our show. We have students that listen to our show. And let's say they are interested in property tax. Like, this is something that they want to specialize in. What advice do you have for young accountants who want to get into this line of work?
Yeah, so if this sounds like an interesting field, what I would encourage you to do is reach out to organizations such as JM Tax Advocates for internship opportunities to kind of give it a shot and see if you enjoy the field. I know we constantly have a rotating internship program with our company, and we certainly value the contributions of interns. And so it's a great way to kind of get to know the field and contribute and get some work experience that can really translate into rounding out your career. Because most of the time folks have zero experience with property taxes, and so even getting a semester of it, so to speak, is really going to be helpful for you as part of rounding out your long-term career, because chances are you're going to have to deal with property taxes in one way, shape, form, or another. And the sooner you get familiar with how to deal with it and evaluate it is only going to serve your career best.
Josh Malancuk, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights today.
Yep. Thanks again for the opportunity, Blake. I enjoyed the conversation. And what I would say to everyone that's listening is feel free to reach out. We're here to help, and definitely value any service inquiries, and appreciate your time today, and certainly wish everyone well and a great rest of the year.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you learned something new. And if you did, wouldn't it be nice to get some CPE credit for it? Well, I've got great news. My new app, Earmark CPE, offers free NASBA-approved CPE credits for listening to podcasts, including this one. Visit earmarkcpe.com to download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. That's earmarkcpe.com.